Let me tell you exactly what happened, the story behind the wound that never really closed. Emily Carter was 16 when everything she thought was solid began to crumble. Her world was a two-bedroom house in the outskirts of Salem, Oregon, where church bells marked time and gossip traveled faster than rain. Her father, Thomas Carter, wasn't cruel by intention, but by conviction. He believed discipline was love, and sin was a sickness you had to cut out before it spread. Her mother, Linda, had been the soft voice that balanced him until cancer took her when Emily was just 13. After that, the laughter drained from their home. The piano in the corner gathered dust. Every dinner became a sermon about morality, purity, and obedience. 3 years later, on a Friday night that still burned in her memory, Emily sat on the back porch with Daniel Miller, her best friend since childhood. The crickets were loud, and the smell of damp grass filled the air. Daniel was the only person who made her feel seen, not judged. That night, he kissed her, and everything that followed changed the course of her life. When she found out she was pregnant 2 months later, she told her father with shaking hands and a voice that cracked after every word. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at her like she'd brought shame into the room, like her very presence poisoned the air. "Who is he?" he asked finally, voice sharp as a blade. "It's Daniel," she whispered. "Daniel Miller," he repeated, almost to himself. "The boy whose father drinks behind the gas station. I warned you." His face reddened as he paced the kitchen. The overhead light flickered, casting shadows on the framed picture of Jesus that hung over the table. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You meant enough to let it happen," he replied coldly. That was the moment something in her broke. She'd expected anger, maybe even disappointment, but not the kind of disgust that made him step back as if she were contagious. That night, while she cried in her room, she heard the phone ring. It was Daniel. "Emily, I'll take care of you," he said softly. "We'll figure it out." But his voice sounded uncertain, scared. When she went to see him the next day, his house was empty. His family had left town overnight, no goodbye, no note. Her father had gone to see Daniel's parents earlier that morning. Whatever was said behind that closed door was enough to make them disappear. A week later, she found her clothes packed in a black trash bag by the front door. No explanation, no farewell. Just a Bible left on top of the pile, open to the verse, "For the wages of sin is death." The air that day was thick with the scent of rain and mud. She remembered standing there, hair plastered to her face, while thunder rolled in the distance. Her father didn't even come outside. The door shut, and that was it. Emily wandered for hours that night, numb and shivering. She ended up at a shelter near downtown, where the volunteers didn't ask questions. They just gave her a blanket, a warm cup of soup, and a bed. That was where she lost the baby 2 months later. A silent miscarriage. The nurses said her body was too weak from stress and lack of food. She remembered the way the fluorescent lights flickered above her hospital bed, how she stared at the ceiling tiles trying to find a pattern, anything to make the pain feel less real. When she called home from the hospital, hoping maybe her father would come, he didn't answer. She left a message anyway, voice trembling. "Dad, it's me. I lost the baby. I just wanted you to know." Silence. A week later, she saw the church bulletin pinned to the shelter's notice board. Her father had preached a sermon titled "The Wages of Weakness." She knew then he had heard her message and chosen his response. That was the moment the hope inside her finally died. She left Oregon soon after, changed her name for a while, worked at diners, cleaned motel rooms, tried to rebuild from nothing. Every new place was a chance to forget, but forgetting never worked, not really. The smell of pine after rain still reminded her of that night. The sound of church bells still made her stomach twist. And now, 20 years later, that letter, his handwriting, his words, had ripped the wound open again. Because the man who threw her away had written something that might explain everything. And for the first time in decades, Emily wasn't sure if she wanted the truth, or to finally let the past stay buried. "And I thought," she whispered to herself that night, holding the envelope close, "I thought I had already cried all my tears." The letter stayed on Emily's kitchen table for 2 days before she dared to read past the first page. Each time she looked at it, her chest tightened, like her father's words were waiting to strike again. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't care what a dead man had to say. But every night, when the house grew quiet and the clock ticked past midnight, she'd catch herself staring at the envelope. On the third night, she couldn't resist anymore. She lit a candle, not out of sentimentality, but because she couldn't stand the harshness of the overhead light. The flame flickered across the paper, and with trembling hands, she unfolded the second page. "Your mother's death was not what you were told," it began. "And what I did after. I did out of fear, not faith." Emily froze. The words felt like ice against her skin. For 20 years, she lived believing her mother, Linda, had died quietly in her sleep, a peaceful end after a long battle with cancer. That's what her father told her. That's what everyone in the town believed. But fear? Of what? Her mind started racing. She could almost hear her father's voice again, calm, controlled, certain. But in these words, there was a tremor she'd never heard before. A kind of confession that made her stomach turn. She read on. "Linda didn't die from her illness. She chose to stop the treatments. She was tired, and I couldn't accept it. I made her beg for forgiveness in her final days, thinking her pain was punishment. God forgive me, I made her last moments unbearable." Emily's throat tightened. The candle flickered violently as a breeze slipped through the cracked window. Her hands shook. She remembered her mother's face, pale, gentle, smiling even through the pain. She remembered her whispering, "Sometimes love means letting go." And her father, standing in the corner of the hospital room, Bible in hand, praying loud enough for everyone to hear, refusing to touch her mother's hand when she asked. She'd been too young to understand then. Now she did. He wasn't praying for her. He was condemning her. Emily's stomach twisted. "You made her suffer," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. "You righteous bastard." The sound of her own voice startled her. It had been years since she'd spoken about him aloud, years since she'd allowed herself to feel the full depth of her anger. But it didn't stop there. The next paragraph was worse. "When you became pregnant, I saw your mother in you. I saw weakness, temptation, sin, all the things I hated myself for. I told myself I was saving you from her path, but truthfully, Emily, I was punishing you for mine." She dropped the paper. The words burned through her chest like acid. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying not to collapse under the weight of it all. Her father hadn't rejected her because she had failed him. He had rejected her because he had failed himself. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. Tears fell freely now, landing on the page, smudging the ink. "You should have said this when you were alive," she choked out. "You should have come for me." The phone rang suddenly, slicing through the silence. She flinched, wiping her tears. It was Rebecca, her half-sister, a woman she barely knew, born from her father's second marriage, after Emily had already vanished. "Hey, Em," Rebecca said softly. I found something in Dad's old storage unit. I think you should see it." "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice low. "Another letter," Rebecca replied. "Addressed to you. Same handwriting. But it's weird. The date says September 2005, 2 weeks after his death." Emily's heart stopped. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I know," Rebecca said. "But it's real. You should come." The line went quiet for a moment before Rebecca added, "You're not the only one he left secrets for." The next day, Emily drove back to Salem, a place she swore she'd never return to. The closer she got, the heavier the air felt. Every road, every pine tree looked the same, like the past had been frozen in time, waiting for her return. When she pulled into the old church parking lot, she could see the house she'd once called home just beyond the hill, now abandoned, windows boarded, weeds crawling up the porch. Her reflection stared back from the car window, older, harder, but still carrying the same eyes of the girl who'd stood there 20 years ago with a trash bag and a broken heart. She clenched her jaw, stepped out into the cold air, and whispered to herself, "It ends here." But as she reached the door of the storage unit, Rebecca already waiting inside, Emily had no idea that what she was about to find would make everything she thought she knew collapse again. And it was in that moment she would later think that everything began to change. The storage unit smelled like dust and regret. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, old sermons in neat folders, and the faint trace of mildew that clung to everything Thomas Carter had ever touched. Emily stood just inside the door, arms crossed, her breath visible in the cold air. Rebecca was kneeling near the back, holding a small wooden box, the kind used to keep wedding photos or love letters. Her eyes started toward Emily, hesitant. "This was in one of Dad's crates," Rebecca said quietly. "It had your name on it. He must have meant for you to have it." Emily hesitated before taking it. Her hands felt like they didn't belong to her. The box was light, but heavy in meaning. She brushed off a layer of dust, and on the lid, faintly carved by hand, were 2 initials, EC. "He made this for me when I was little," Emily murmured. "I used to keep seashells in it." Rebecca smiled sadly. "He never talked about you. But when I was a kid, sometimes I'd catch him staring at that box like it was something sacred." The silence that followed was thick. Emily kneeled, placed the box on the ground, and slowly opened it. Inside, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was another letter and a cassette tape. The kind that belonged in an old dictaphone. The paper around it was yellowed, fragile, written in the same familiar hand. "To my daughter, if the first letter wasn't enough." Emily's fingers shook. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. "This is insane," she muttered. "He's been dead 20 years. Maybe he mailed it before he died?" Rebecca offered softly. "The date," Emily said. "You said it was after." Rebecca nodded. "Postmarked 2 weeks later." Something in Emily's chest tightened, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. "Then who the hell sent it?" she whispered. Rebecca hesitated. There was no return address. Just the church's old P.O. box. Emily stared at her, then back at the letter. Her heart hammered. The church. The one he'd preached in until the day he died. She unwrapped the cassette first. Someone, her father, she guessed, had labeled it in faint pencil. Truth. For Emily. For a long moment, she just sat there. The tape lay on her palm, cold and small, yet somehow enormous. "Do you want to listen to it?" Rebecca asked gently. Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe she needed to hear it, to stop letting the ghosts speak only through paper. Rebecca handed her an old tape recorder she'd found in one of the boxes. Emily pushed play. The static hissed first, then a cough. And then that voice. "Emily," a faint male voice began, rough and labored. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone." Her breath hitched. His voice was weaker than she remembered, fragile, almost human. "I had to tell you before the end. There's something about your mother I never confessed, not to anyone. She didn't just stop treatment. She left because of me." Emily froze. "I found a letter she wrote. It was meant for you. But I burned it. I told myself it would protect you from the truth. I was wrong. I destroyed the only piece of her you had left." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Rebecca whispered, "Oh my God." Her father's voice trembled through the recorder. "The day before she died, she told me she forgave me. I didn't believe her. I thought she was delirious. But now I see she was right. I couldn't love you properly because I didn't know how to love without control. I thought if I broke you, you'd come back pure. Instead, I broke both of us." Emily's hands covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. The pain she'd carried for 2 decades was suddenly raw again, blistering. "If someone finds this," his voice went on, weaker now, "please make sure she gets it. She deserves to know I was wrong." And then silence. Emily hit stop. Her reflection wavered in the metal of the recorder, pale, red-eyed, trembling. She felt sick. But under the sickness, something shifted. A new kind of anger, not the burning rage she'd known all her life, but something quieter, sharper. She looked up at Rebecca, who stood frozen, hands clasped in front of her. "He doesn't get to define me anymore," Emily said, her voice breaking but steady. "Not after this." What are you going to do? Rebecca asked. Emily stood, gripping the letter in one hand, the tape in the other. I'm going back to the house, she said. To finish what he started and to bury what he never could. Rebecca's eyes widened. Emily. No, Emily cut in. For 20 years, I let that man's ghost control my life. I carried his shame, his guilt, his silence. I'm done. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Her voice rose, trembling but powerful, echoing through the cold metal walls of the unit. He took my voice. I'm taking it back. For the first time in her life, Emily meant every word. That night, she drove to her childhood home, the boarded windows, the rotting porch, the silence pressing against her chest like old memories. The moonlight spilled across the doorway, and as she pushed it open, the hinges screamed like a warning. But she stepped inside anyway, because this time, she wasn't the girl who'd been thrown out in the rain. She was the woman who came back to face the storm. And she whispered into the darkness, "This ends with me." The house groaned under the weight of time. Dust danced in the air like ghosts caught in moonlight. Emily stepped inside slowly, each floorboard creaking beneath her boots, echoing down the dark hallway. The faint smell of old wood and mildew filled her lungs. For a moment, she stood still. Every part of her wanted to run. But instead, she turned on her flashlight and took a deep breath. This isn't your prison anymore, she whispered to herself. The living room looked almost untouched, like her father had been frozen in time. The same cross hung over the mantel. The same cracked Bible sat on the side table. Even the same threadbare armchair where he used to sit every evening, reading aloud from scripture, as if trying to convince the walls to believe him. Emily felt her throat tighten. She forced herself to move. She opened the curtains, the first real act of rebellion. Light spilled in, weak but persistent. The air shifted. It smelled of dust and sunlight instead of decay. For the first time, the house didn't feel like his. It felt like something that could finally belong to her. She began to clean slowly at first, then faster. She gathered the old photographs scattered on the mantel. Her mother's smile. Her father's stiff posture. Herself as a child, clutching a doll, eyes wide and innocent. She placed the pictures of her mother in one pile, her father's in another. When she picked up a photo of her parents together, she hesitated. They looked young, happy before faith became punishment, before love became doctrine. Her father's arm around Linda's shoulders, her mother's laughter mid-breath. I wish I'd known you like that, she whispered. Hours passed. She found herself humming an old song, one her mother used to sing while cooking. Her voice cracked at first, but then it steadied. It felt almost sacred, like she was reclaiming something stolen. By dusk, the house was different. The floor shone beneath layers of dust she'd swept away. The windows were open, letting in the cold autumn air. Emily stood in the middle of the room, sweaty, exhausted, but breathing freely for the first time in years. Then she saw it, a small metal box tucked behind the fireplace. It was rusted shut. She grabbed a screwdriver and pried it open. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some sealed, some already opened. All addressed to her mother. Her hands shook as she picked one at random. The handwriting was familiar, her mother's. Tom, please. Let her see me. She deserves to say goodbye. The date was 2 days before her mother's death. Emily's vision blurred. She opened another one. If you read this, it means I'm gone. Please tell Emily I love her. No matter what happens. Emily pressed the letter to her chest, tears spilling freely. Her mother hadn't wanted to leave her. Her father had. For so long, Emily had carried the lie that her mother had simply slipped away, too weak to hold on. But now she knew her mother had fought to stay, to say goodbye, and her father had denied her that one final wish. Emily's heart felt like it might break all over again, but this time, it wasn't the helpless kind of pain. It was cleansing. She whispered through her tears, "You tried, Mom. You tried." When night fell, she sat on the old porch steps, a blanket over her shoulders, the cool Oregon air biting at her skin. The stars were faint, barely visible through the clouds. But they were there, steady, constant, indifferent. She sipped from a mug of coffee she'd made on a portable stove, watching the steam rise into the night. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore, it was peaceful. A car pulled up quietly on the dirt road. Rebecca stepped out, holding a box of takeout and 2 plastic forks. "Figured you might not want to be alone," she said. Emily smiled faintly. "You figured right." They sat together on the steps, eating in silence for a while. The only sound was the wind rustling through the pines. "He hurt you," Rebecca said finally. "But he hurt me too. Just differently. I grew up in his shadow, all rules, no warmth." "I guess we both got different sides of the same ghost," Emily replied. Rebecca nodded. "Maybe it's time to stop letting him live through us." Emily looked out at the horizon. "That's exactly what I'm doing." For the first time in decades, she meant it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's final letter. She read it again under the starlight, her mother's words like a soft voice echoing through time. "Love is not obedience, Emily. Love is freedom." Emily closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. The night smelled of pine and smoke. She smiled through her tears. "I'm starting to breathe different," she whispered. And she was. Weeks passed. The Oregon rain came and went like a living thing, sometimes gentle, sometimes punishing, always cleansing. Emily stayed in the old house, restoring it piece by piece. Not for him, not for nostalgia, but for herself. Each morning, she brewed coffee on the front porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, watching the fog drift over the valley. The world felt wider now, quieter inside her. There were still moments when grief punched through her chest, sudden and sharp, but it no longer defined her. She got a job at the local library in Salem, shelving books, fixing bindings, breathing in the smell of paper and dust instead of fear and shame. The first time someone smiled at her without pity, a young coworker named Maya, who laughed easily and called her something loosened in her chest. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath. At night, she wrote. Not sermons. Not apologies. Letters. To her mother. To the girl she used to be. To the father she would never forgive, but could finally understand. "I used to think love had to hurt to be real," one of her letters read. "Now I know it doesn't have to cost your soul." Her days began to find rhythm again. Coffee, work, laughter. Cleaning, remembering, healing. There was peace in the small things, the way sunlight pooled on the kitchen floor, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the feel of warm dishwater after dinner. And yet, healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights, she'd wake drenched in sweat, hearing her father's voice in her head, "You've shamed this family." The words echoed like thunder from an old storm. But now, instead of shrinking, she would whisper back into the darkness. "You were wrong." Each time she said it, the memory lost a little of its power. Months turned into seasons. Winter melted into spring, and with it came change. She painted the walls soft blue, her mother's favorite color. She planted flowers along the porch steps where weeds had once grown wild. She even found her old piano in the attic, covered in dust and spider webs. It took days to clean and tune it, but when she pressed the first key and it rang clear, she laughed out loud. Maya started visiting on weekends, helping with repairs. Together, they built new shelves, replaced the broken windows, and repainted the shutters. One evening, as the sky blushed orange, Maya said quietly, "You know, this place feels alive again." Emily smiled. "Yeah, so do I." They shared stories over wine and pizza boxes, two women piecing together their own versions of forgiveness. Maya didn't ask too many questions, and Emily didn't offer too many answers. It was enough to be seen without needing to explain. By summer, the house wasn't a grave anymore. It was a home. Her home. One afternoon, as she was sorting through boxes in the attic, she found something buried beneath old hymnals, a small cassette recorder. Not the one from the storage unit, but another. Inside it, a fresh tape. No label. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. At first, there was static, then a faint sound, not her father's voice, but her mother's. "If someone ever finds this, I want Emily to know that love can survive anything, even silence." I forgave him not because he deserved it, but because I couldn't let his bitterness be the last thing I carried. Emily's breath caught. Her mother's voice was soft, fragile, like wind through the trees. One day, my sweet girl, you'll learn that forgiveness isn't about erasing pain. It's about choosing peace over poison. Tears streamed down her face. It was as if her mother had waited all these years to speak to her again, and now, finally, she had. She whispered into the still air. I hear you, Mom. I do. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt held. That night, she stood outside under a blanket of stars. The air smelled of lilac and wet grass. Fireflies blinked near the edge of the woods. Her heart was quiet, not empty, just still. In that stillness, she finally understood something her father never had. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about letting it teach you how to begin again. She smiled softly, whispering into the night. I finally understand that I'm worth something. And for the first time, she truly believed it. It was a gray afternoon in early fall when the past came knocking, not metaphorically, but literally. Emily was at the library, sorting returned books, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Hello, Ms. Carter, a woman's voice asked. This is Linda Whitmore from the Salem Historical Society. I think you might want to come down here. Someone just dropped off a box, addressed to you. It's from Thomas Carter's estate. The name hit like a stone to the chest. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in months. That's not possible, she murmured. His estate was settled years ago. That's what I thought, Linda replied. But this box was found behind a false wall during a church renovation. Looks like it's been sealed up for decades. Emily's stomach twisted. I'll be there in an hour. When she arrived, the box was sitting on a wooden table in the middle of the archive room, small, worn, and labeled in her father's precise handwriting. For Emily, when she's ready. Her pulse quickened. She didn't want to touch it, but she couldn't look away either. Linda excused herself, leaving Emily alone. The air smelled like old paper and varnish. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside was a single leather-bound journal, and folded on top of it, a note. I asked Pastor Williams to hide this if I didn't have the courage to send it. If you found it, then maybe I was wrong about time being a healer. Her fingers trembled as she opened the journal. The first page began with words she hadn't expected. This isn't a confession. It's an explanation. I didn't just send you away to punish you, Emily. I sent you away because I thought they were coming for you. She blinked, frowning. They? She turned the page, heart hammering. Your mother didn't die from cancer. She took her own life. But not out of despair, out of fear. She knew too much about something that happened in this town. Something that would have destroyed everything I built. And I couldn't protect her. I told myself I was saving you by hiding you from it. Emily's throat closed. Suicide? Fear? None of it made sense. She kept reading, her breath coming faster. I lied to everyone, even to God. I buried the truth with her. But if you're reading this, it means it's time to stop running. At the bottom of the page was a single line, underlined twice. The truth is in the church basement. Her skin prickled. The church. Of course. The same building where her father had preached about sin and salvation. The same place where he'd burned her mother's letter. By dusk, she was standing in front of it, the old chapel half collapsed, the stained glass fractured by time. The rain had started again, soft but steady. She pushed open the door. The hinges moaned in protest. The air inside was thick with mold and dust, but something deeper, the weight of memory. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she made her way to the back hall. The basement door was still there, half-rotted but intact. Her hand hesitated on the knob. Then she turned it. The stairs creaked under her weight as she descended. The smell hit first, damp wood, rust, and something faintly chemical. She reached the bottom and froze. There was a chair. A single chair in the middle of the concrete floor. And on it, a figure. Rebecca. What are you doing here? Emily breathed. Rebecca looked up, her face pale, eyes red. I got a call from one of Dad's old church friends. He said he had something for us. I came early. And? Emily asked. Rebecca swallowed hard, holding out a folder. This. His journals. Not the sermons, the real ones. He kept records of everything. Every sin he thought he had to erase to protect his faith. Emily opened it. Inside were names, dates, confessions from church members, and one entry circled in red. Linda Carter, unfaithful, but not unrepentant. Truth hidden for Emily's sake. Emily's heart stopped. He killed her spirit with shame, she whispered. He couldn't let her live free. So he buried her twice, once in a grave and again in lies. Rebecca's tears fell silently. He thought he was doing God's work, but he was just scared. Emily closed the folder. The air was heavy, thick with the ghosts of everything they'd both lost. She looked at Rebecca, who was trembling. "We don't owe his ghost anything," Emily said quietly. "We're not his mistakes to carry." Rebecca looked up at her. "So what do we do?" Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a lighter. Her hand didn't shake. "We let the past burn." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Together, they placed the papers and journals in a metal bin in the center of the basement. The flames started small, soft, almost delicate, before roaring upward, devouring every trace of the lies that had defined them. The firelight danced against their faces. Emily watched the pages curl and blacken, and with each word that turned to ash, she felt lighter. When it was over, Rebecca whispered, "You don't hate him anymore, do you?" Emily shook her head slowly. "No, I don't need to." She stepped back into the rain, lifting her face toward the sky as the water mixed with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "I don't need to hate him," she said softly, "because I don't need him at all." And for the first time in her life, that truth didn't hurt, it set her free. "I never thought peace would be so quiet. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from finally understanding." When I drove away from the church that night, the rain had stopped. The sky had cracked open just enough to let the stars breathe again. I rolled the windows down, letting the cold air rush through, carrying with it the scent of smoke and pine. The fire we'd left behind was still burning in my mind, but it wasn't destruction anymore. It was release. For 20 years, I had lived like a wound that refused to close. I thought my father's voice was carved into me forever. But as the miles stretched between me and that old church, his voice faded into something smaller, a whisper, a memory, nothing more. I stopped by the river where my mother used to take me when I was a child. The same river where she'd told me once, "Water remembers everything, Em. But it keeps flowing anyway." I stood there for a long time, watching the current move beneath the moonlight, carrying leaves, reflections, pieces of time itself. I took my mother's letter out of my coat pocket, the one I'd read 100 times, and I read it again under the open sky. "Love is freedom." Those 3 words were everything she'd tried to give me, and everything my father had been too afraid to understand. I knelt by the water, let the letter rest in my palms, and whispered, "I forgive you, Mom. And I forgive me too." Then I let it go. The paper floated for a few seconds before the current caught it and carried it downstream. I watched until it disappeared, not with sadness, but with peace. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing her. I felt like I was finally giving her what she'd asked for: release. The next morning, I woke up in my mother's old house, now my house, with sunlight spilling across the floorboards. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, alive. I made coffee, fed the stray cat that had started visiting, and looked out over the yard. The flowers I'd planted months ago were blooming, wild and imperfect, but thriving. I realized that healing hadn't been one grand, cinematic moment. It had been slow, the kind of change you don't notice until you look back and realize you've survived. That day, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been there since the funeral, not his, not hers. 2 graves side by side, covered in moss and time. I stood between them, unsure of what to say. For years, I had imagined this moment, imagined shouting, crying, demanding answers from the cold stone. But instead, I felt calm. I knelt, brushed the dirt from my mother's name, and said softly, "You were braver than anyone ever knew." Then I turned to my father's grave. "You were wrong," I said, voice steady. "But I understand now. You were afraid of love because you never believed you deserved it. The wind moved through the trees, a soft rustle like an exhale. For a moment, I could almost feel both of them, not as saints or sinners, but as human beings who had stumbled their way through pain, just like me. "I won't carry your ghosts anymore," I whispered. "But I'll carry the lessons." The leaves rustled again, and I took that as enough. Driving home, I passed the old diner where Daniel Miller had once worked. I hadn't thought of him in years. He'd been just a boy, scared, unready, and I realized I didn't hate him either. We had both been children trying to build futures from pieces of broken families. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about anyone else. Maybe it was the moment you stopped needing someone to pay for what happened. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun melt behind the trees. Rebecca called. "How are you holding up?" "Lighter," I said. Like I finally set down something I didn't realize I'd been carrying. "I'm glad," she replied. "You sound peaceful." "I think I am." We talked for an hour, laughing softly about memories that used to hurt too much to touch. When we hung up, the world was quiet again, not empty, just still. I looked at the house, the walls my father built, the air my mother once filled with laughter, and for the first time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt mine. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of pine and rain, and whispered the words I wished I'd known as a child. "I don't need to be anyone's redemption. I just need to be free." And that, I think, was the greatest victory of all. That was the moment I would later write. When pain finally turned into peace. 1 year later, the seasons had turned full circle in Oregon. The house that once stood like a mausoleum of grief now bloomed with color. The porch was lined with potted lavender and wild daisies. Wind chimes sang softly every time the breeze rolled through the valley. Emily Carter, 38 now, stood on that porch with a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the morning fog dissolve into sunlight. There was peace in her face. Not the brittle kind born from denial, but the quiet sort that grows out of surviving yourself. Inside, a record played softly Norah Jones, one of her mother's favorites. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen, where Rebecca hummed tunelessly as she cooked. They had fallen into an easy rhythm over the past year, sisters not by childhood, but by choice. "You still take your coffee black, huh?" Rebecca called out. "Old habits die hard," Emily said, smiling. "You still burn the first pancake?" "Tradition," Rebecca replied, laughing. It had become their Sunday ritual: breakfast, music, and stories. Sometimes heavy, sometimes light. They didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. They just didn't let it control the air anymore. On the living room wall hung a framed photograph, the two of them in front of the rebuilt church. The town had turned it into a community center, the Carter House of Hope. Emily hadn't wanted it named after her family, but Rebecca insisted. "Let something good wear that name for once," she'd said. Now, every Wednesday, Emily hosted writing workshops there for women who had survived their own storms, loss, abandonment, silence. They didn't write about pain, not directly. They wrote about what came after. About the small, defiant beauty of continuing. One of her students, a quiet single mother named Jenna, had told her recently, "Your story saved me, Emily. It made me believe my life wasn't over just because it broke once." That sentence had stayed with her for days. Because for so long, Emily had thought her story was something to hide. But maybe that was the point. Maybe survival was meant to be shared. After breakfast, she and Rebecca walked down the dirt path to the river, the same place where Emily had let her mother's letter go. The trees had grown thicker, the water clearer. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. When they reached the bank, Emily pulled something from her coat pocket, a small wooden box, the same one her father had made for her as a child. It had been repaired, polished, reborn. "What's in there?" Rebecca asked. "Letters," Emily said softly. "One to Mom, one to Dad, one to the girl I used to be." She knelt, placed the box gently by the water, and whispered, "It's time." The current caught it immediately, carrying it downstream. Rebecca slipped her arm around her sister's shoulders. They watched in silence until it disappeared around the bend. "Think they'll hear you?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Maybe," Emily said. "But it's enough that I finally said it." They walked back to the house under a golden canopy of falling leaves. The air smelled of earth and endings, but also beginnings. That night, Emily sat at her desk by the window, finishing a letter, not for the past this time, but for the future. To whoever finds this. Maybe you've been hurt the way I was. Maybe you've carried a silence that wasn't yours to keep. If so, I hope you know this. Pain doesn't mean you're broken, it means you felt deeply. And feeling deeply is proof you're still alive. You don't have to forgive everyone. You just have to stop letting them live inside you rent-free. Love, even when it scares you. And when the past calls, don't answer. It has nothing new to say. She folded the letter and placed it in a new box on her desk labeled, "For my daughter, someday." As the moonlight spilled across the floor, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked older, yes, but lighter. Softer. Like a woman who had finally made peace with the echoes. The phone buzzed. A message from Maya. "The center's full tonight. People are sharing their stories. You'd be proud." Emily smiled. "I already am." She turned off the lamp, leaving the letter on the desk. The house hummed softly around her, alive, breathing, hers. Before bed, she stepped outside one last time. The air was cold, the stars bright. She closed her eyes and whispered to the night, "Mom, Dad, I made it." And in the stillness that followed, she thought she heard it, a faint echo, not from heaven, not from memory, but from somewhere deep inside. You were always meant to, and that was enough. And that, Emily would later say, is why I wanted to tell this story. Because sometimes, the ghosts don't disappear. They just learn to walk beside you. If you've made it this far, thank you. I never imagined I'd share this story with anyone, let alone with the world. For most of my life, silence was my survival. But sometimes, silence becomes the very thing that keeps you trapped. Telling this story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about truth. The kind that doesn't erase the pain, but gives it meaning. When that letter arrived 20 years after my father's death, I thought it was a curse. I thought reopening those wounds would destroy me. But I was wrong. It saved me. Because the truth is, sometimes healing starts in the ugliest places, in the basement of an old church, in a forgotten letter, in the ashes of what was meant to shame you. If my father could see me now, I think he'd finally understand. Faith isn't about control. Love isn't about obedience. And forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the hook entirely. I spent years hating him for what he did to me and to my mother. But I don't carry that hate anymore. I carry her strength instead. I carry the laughter that came back into my life, the friends who showed up when I finally let them in, the mornings I wake up and don't feel heavy anymore. And I carry this, the understanding that pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does. There are days I still feel the ache, the echo of the past. But now it doesn't drown me. It reminds me that I survived. That I chose to keep living when it would have been easier not to. If you're listening to this, maybe you've carried your own letter, maybe not on paper, but in your chest. Something unsent, unread, unfinished. I want you to know something I wish someone had told me years ago. You are allowed to open it. You are allowed to cry. And you are allowed to heal, even if no one ever said sorry. Because healing isn't about waiting for the apology that never comes. It's about deciding that your life deserves to move forward, even if your past never does. So, to whoever needs to hear this, maybe you were abandoned, maybe you were lied to, maybe you were told you weren't enough. You were. You are. And maybe, like me, one day you'll look back and realize that the letter, the one that shattered everything, was actually your beginning. If this story touched something inside you, stay. Don't scroll away yet. I want to ask you something, not as a storyteller, but as someone who has walked through the dark and found her way out. Comment below. What was the moment you realized you deserved peace? I read every comment. I mean that. Because these stories, yours, mine, ours, they're what keep the light alive. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like, it helps this story reach others who are still searching for hope. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories that speak to the heart, the kind that hurt a little, but heal a lot. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening not just to my story, but to the quiet between the words. Because maybe that's where healing really begins. When we stop whispering our pain and start turning it into something beautiful. This was Emily's story, but it could have been anyone's. It could have been yours. Sometimes the letter doesn't come to haunt you, she would later write. It comes to remind you that even grief can deliver grace. And that's the truth I'll leave you with. No miracles, no magic, just the messy, miraculous courage to keep going. Thank you for being here. And if this story found you today, maybe that's because it was time.